After a slump of a couple of dull episodes, we move on to, well, still not a very good episode, but at least it's marginally more entertaining. The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne, unsurprisingly, introduces us to the animated series version of Hugo Strange, one of Batman's very oldest enemies, since he first appeared all the way back in Detective Comics number 36, released in February 1940, which predates the Joker by a couple of months. Though not one of Batman's most famous rogues, it's still pretty cool that he's persisted for so long and been adapted into several Batman media. My favorite versions are from The Batman and Arkham City, but unfortunately not this one. I'll get into that in a moment. Seeing as how Batman the Animated Series pulls a significant amount from 70s comic book Batman, it makes sense that they chose to use Hugo Strange since he was a major part of Steve Englehart's run, which I have now read. Some of it had already been adapted into the show with the Laughing Fish episode, and it's where the idea of Strange auctioning Batman's secret identity comes from. One of the coolest parts of Hugo Strange in those issues is that he was obsessed with Batman to the point where he wanted to be Batman, going as far as to wear the costume, which is a wonderfully twisted image. There's nothing quite that twisted here, but this episode at least draws on his origins in the books as a mad scientist. No monster men, but he does have this pretty far-fetched machine that can read thoughts, though it may be the single most problematic aspect of the story. His character design is also very reminiscent of how he was drawn in his earlier appearances, especially with that really weird head shape. It's also kind of peculiar, to hear Bruce and others refer to him as Doctor Strange when that moniker has become associated with the Marvel character. I believe in most other adaptations he's given the title of Professor to distance him from Stephen Strange, Sorcerer Supreme, and also Adam Strange from within the same company. Man, there are a lot of Stranges. Very strange. Anyway, his plan is a little reminiscent of Poison Ivy's in Eternal Youth, luring influential people to what seems like a relaxation resort to lure them into a trap. I like the idea of using people's deepest and darkest secrets as blackmail, and this is how the episode begins, as an honorable Judge Vargas makes a deal with a couple of thugs to get her hands on an incriminating videotape. Using people's weaknesses against them and forcing them to engage in seedy and corrupt deals feels very Gotham City, a place where even the best intentioned person who lives there will get drawn into the madness and crime. This is territory that has already been explored, and in a much darker manner, in episodes like The Joker's Favor and Two-Face. There's a point where the opening scene loses me a little, and that's when Judge Vargas tries to retrieve her videotape, which had landed on the edge of a beam on the bridge. I know she's desperate for no one to see the tape, but if that is indeed the case, why not just leave the tape where it is and let it drop into the water? Sounds like a pretty good way to get rid of the evidence to me. Even if it doesn't drop and stays perfectly on the edge, it looks so dangerous to retrieve it, I doubt anyone would try. The only logic I could see in trying so hard to get the tape is that she believes Batman would try to get it and put her away if he found out what was on it. Then again, even that is moot because these tapes are the most useless pieces of blackmail anyway. I may as well get it out of the way right now. Those tapes prove absolutely zilch because they come from Strange's machine that can see thoughts. It does seem to actually work, judging from Strange's sessions with Vargas and Bruce, but Bruce himself proves how useless the tapes are in the climax by thinking up something that never happened, so the villains will think Strange is duping them. If the tapes were given to the authorities or something, how would they know it's not completely fabricated? It's not like these tapes are security camera footage or something. The only way these tapes hold any water as proof is if Strange also demonstrates his mind machine and proves that it works. But even that doesn't fix the fatal flaw that there's no way of knowing whose thoughts are being transposed on the tape. For all anyone knows, Strange himself could just imagine that Judge Vargas caused the Great Dock Fire, and the machine would record that. It's clear that the concept of the mind-reading machine was given far too little thought. I think it would have been more interesting to have Strange do regular therapy sessions to uncover people's secrets, perhaps similar to the scene we see in the first part of Two-Face where he's hypnotized. And not even bother with the sci-fi element, but I suppose that's there to harken back to Strange's mad scientist roots. Anyway, as Batman investigates Strange, he checks into the resort to get a first-hand look at Strange's treatment. I know the idea is supposed to be he's using his Bruce Wayne persona to get into the resort in the first place, but it would have been smarter to snoop around Strange's facility in the dead of night as Batman, instead of taking part in Strange's relaxation program, which he must be suspicious of after what happened to Judge Vargas. Honestly, I'm not sure why he didn't do this since he puts the costume on later anyway in the episode, and sneaking into places and rummaging through files is exactly what this particular Batman's MO is, as we see in Heart of Ice, See No Evil, and Vendetta. But whatever, we get to see Bruce's thoughts through the machine, which I think is interesting to analyze in the context of what we've seen of the character so far in these reviews. This scene makes it clear that the driving force behind Bruce wanting to fight crime as a child is revenge. While this certainly makes sense as the response a child would have after such a tragedy, I truly don't think this version of Batman considers vengeance his main objective in his war on crime, or that he even holds the very concept of vengeance in high regard. The most obvious example that comes to mind is his final confrontation with Mr. Freeze in Heart of Ice, where Batman corrects his proclamation of vengeance with, "No, justice." Also, if revenge was Bruce's driving force, I think he'd be a much darker character and be even more brutal with criminals or not prioritize saving innocent lives over catching criminals. So to me, it's a little weird to pair the word revenge with the Batman symbol in this Mind Machine scene, but I think it could work under certain perspectives. Just as there's an example of Batman denouncing vengeance, there's another very clear one where he uses the term in an uplifting context, and that, of course, is the scene from Nothing to Fear, where he says the famous quote to overcome Scarecrow's fear toxin, "I am vengeance, I am the night, I am Batman." It could have just been written that way because it sounds cool, and maybe it was. But since The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne says that it was a burning desire for revenge that was the initial spark for Batman, it makes sense to me that Batman would bring up this very pure emotion to clear his mind and remember who he's really supposed to be. But I think somewhere along the way, this Bruce Wayne grew past revenge. Andrea Beaumont in Mask of the Phantasm points out this dichotomy in the most perfect way when Batman asks her, "What will vengeance solve?" And she responds, "If anyone knows the answer to that, it's you." And later in that movie, Alfred points out that Bruce walks on the edge of the abyss, but has never fallen in. Though it would be cool if this series had dedicated an episode to exploring a particular moment where Bruce truly realized the folly of revenge, it's clear that people like Alfred and Robin ground him, keeping him dedicated to a just cause and not a selfish one. Putting Robin into the equation is especially interesting considering Alfred's point in the Robin's Reckoning flashback, where he tells Bruce that while revenge can taste deliciously sweet, he needs to focus less on capturing Zuko and spend more time being a friend to Dick. I really like that Alfred says, "Isn't that what you needed, sir?" So we see that Dick grows up happier and that the concept of vengeance is almost never prevalent in him, with the exception of that episode where he confronts Zuko. For Bruce, that anger is always there, but tempered. When put all together, this actually doesn't make the animated series Batman inconsistently written, but that part of his character is that he is, in a manner, a walking contradiction in the same way most great characters and most real people are. For example, let's briefly compare Batman to another superhero whose core premise contains a contradiction: Daredevil. Matt Murdock is a lawyer by day, meant to uphold the law, but he breaks the law every night fighting crime as Daredevil. Frank Miller himself, in an interview for the movie DVD, says, "It's a fun contradiction, but it's a contradiction," when talking about his decision to get rid of the lawyer aspect in the story Born Again. At the same time, it's difficult to deny that this contradiction in Matt Murdock has provided writers a well of interesting stories to tell because that contradiction is packed with tons of conflict. The same is very much true for Batman in the animated series, in that he fights fire with fire, to a degree. He wraps himself in the guise of a monstrous gargoyle, and he has a genuine darkness to him below the surface, as we see in the episode The Forgotten, where the mention of family triggers the memory of when Batman was born. Yet he channels these emotions into something positive, and I think it's part of the reason this show has a lot of supervillain rehabilitation episodes, particularly ones like It's Never Too Late, Harley's Holiday, and Double Talk. He recognizes that people like Arnold Stromwell or Harley Quinn are struggling with a darkness of their own, so in his stoic way, he often tries to show them compassion, which is a theme we'll pick up more on in Lockup. I wish The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne played with some of his psychology a little more, but at least this scene does accentuate another dichotomy in the character, with the easygoing persona he puts on when he first talks to Strange, compared to the shift in his voice as we see Batman on the machine's screen. It makes it clear that Kevin Conroy's Bruce and Batman don't sound exactly the same. The voices have an entirely different attitude, and it's always fun when individual scenes allow us to compare the two. Yet the real fun in this episode begins as the three supervillains enter the story. Admittedly, upon rewatch, Joker, Penguin, and Two-Face taking part in an auction for a tape of Batman's secret identity pales in comparison to the awesome villain banner we see in the later episode, Almost Got Him. But this is a nice preview for that, and still easily manages to be the most entertaining part of the episode. Joker particularly has a way of bringing up the energy of the episode just by his demented glee. His answering machine is a great way of introducing the Joker without us seeing him, which is both a bit unnerving and funny, so very much in character. The villains arriving proper on the plane provide some much needed tension. All three of them feel far more dangerous than strange. Moments like Joker threatening a goon after dropping his suitcase filled with money, or Two-Face yelling at Strange to get on with things as he begins an introductory speech, contribute heavily to a sense of danger, foreshadowing how the villains and Strange will be at odds in the final act. It's also fun that they're all brutal thugs, but they each put on an air of respectability or refinement when they agree to pool all their money together so they can all see the tape. Since this episode is based on Steve Englehart's Hugo Strange story, it uses the same three supervillains, but Two-Face definitely feels the most thematically appropriate. I already discussed Batman's dichotomies at length, but dichotomy is what Two-Face is all about. He even addresses this directly when Strange pleads that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and Two-Face isn't able to believe him, citing his friendship with Bruce for some solid continuity. It's telling that even though Bruce and Harvey Dent seemed pretty close prior and during his transformation into Two-Face, Harvey never even had an inkling that his friend was carrying the sort of motivation and drive necessary to be Batman. I also like that the writing allows the characters to do what they absolutely would in a situation. Strange doesn't stubbornly hang on to the secret in the vague hope of gaining more money. He straight up blurts out that Bruce Wayne is Batman in front of the villains and Commissioner Gordon. It makes the return to status quo at the end feel a bit less like a cop-out. Speaking of the end, I'm also on board using Robin as a pinch hitter of sorts. He's barely a part of the episode, with the exception of a couple scenes, and the story's not about him at all, though I still used him to make my point about Batman's character in this show, but the fact he can casually pop in to lend Batman a hand makes them feel like a genuine team unit, which is cool, since with the wrong execution, it could have felt far too convenient a way to wrap up the episode. It also helps it was Batman's idea to bring Robin in to lend him a hand. The one thing I would really change about Robin's role is cutting out Alfred's line that he called Dick as he and Batman are chasing after the airplane. I know it's there to remind the audience that Robin has a role to play other than a fun exchange at the beginning of the episode, but that line makes the ending very obvious, and you lose the feeling of, oh right, I completely forgot about Dick. Maybe viewers would remember anyway, since this episode isn't complicated or anything, and only has a 22-minute runtime, but I still believe it would have given a second Bruce Wayne seemingly showing up out of nowhere an extra oomph. That's pretty much all I have to say in terms of story. Nothing deep, and kind of built on a faulty premise, but has enough entertainment value to not be a chore to sit through. The animation is also a step up from last time. Not the most gorgeous visuals we've seen thus far, or will see in the future, but I like that characters all look mostly on model, give or take an odd moment here and there. None of the action here, what little there is, feels dynamically staged, and it's lacking a bit of atmosphere because the action doesn't take place in Gotham City. I usually praise episodes for taking Batman out of his element and see how he fares in different locales, but there's nothing especially interesting about Strange's resort. Even Ivy's resort in Eternal Youth had a twisted forest look that made Batman feel trapped in nightmarish scenery. The backgrounds in this episode are competent enough, but they're lacking in personality. More atmospheric backgrounds wouldn't have made up for the lackluster story, but would have at least made this a more memorable episode. And there's some nifty storyboarding touches here and there, like revealing each villain one at a time, stepping out from the shadows. Which reminds me of the auction scene in the comics, where we never even get to see the three bad guys, and they're just obscured in darkness. The beginning also has a couple really cool Batman silhouette shots, which I swear nothing does better than this show. Once again, we don't have much new in the way of prominent voice actors, aside from Ray Bucktenica as Hugo Strange. I'm not familiar with any of his other work, but he does have another DC connection in that he guest starred in an episode of the Lois and Clark TV show. I gotta say, I'm not a huge fan of his take on the character. It's not like the material he's given here is brilliant, but he sounded like a typical mad scientist of some vague European descent. I'm not saying his voice acting is bad, just unremarkable. There was a particular moment where his delivery sounded too subdued, and that's when he discovers that Bruce Wayne has destroyed his mind machine. It took me years to build that device, but no matter. I don't know, it just seemed like from the way the character was animated, his reaction would have been a bit more impassioned than that. Fortunately, Frank Gorshin and later Richard Green gave a pretty unnerving voice for him in The Batman. Corey Burton's voice for Arkham City is my favorite, despite him getting less focus in that story than I would have liked. He sounds extremely intimidating, and is the exact voice I hear when I read Strange's dialogues in the comics now. As I've already mentioned, Joker brings a very fresh energy to the story, and Mark Hamill is a huge reason why. He can make a standard Joker line sound like the most spontaneous thing the character could possibly say. My favorite in this episode is when Joker is pooling all his cash for the auction. 51,240,685 dollars and 53 cents. Richard Mole returns for the first time in a good long while as Two-Face, and I still love how gnarly his voice sounds. It's like his vocal cords have been dipped in acid. I believe this is also the first return for Paul Williams as Penguin. His character design in this part of the show is closer to his look in Batman Returns, but his personality is more akin to a refined intellectual, which is lots of fun, and Williams sells it perfectly. Unfortunately, Penguin doesn't get an extremely good episode in this show, nor a particularly memorable moment in this episode, but what few lines he has are delivered very well. So that's all I got for this strange secret of Bruce Wayne. It gives us a single decent insight into Batman, and some fun villain moments in a run-of-the-mill adventure, which isn't a bad way to spend 22 minutes. I give it a decent 3.5 out of 5. Next time around, we get our next two-parter, Heart of Steel. Actually, I don't remember being a huge fan of it, but who knows, maybe on further analysis there will be more to discuss than I think. Until next time, take care, and make sure that if you have any major secrets, don't visit a psychiatrist with a weird machine in his office. He might use it to blackmail you with evidence that's not evidence. See you guys.